over 1 million tenants in New York City living in rent-stabilized apartments are having to adjust to the increase given to landlords and the increased rents which they now have to pay. I'm Sam Taitt. My guests are Housing Court Judge Kevin McClanahan and Ms. Lisa Kenner, who is president of the NYCHA Van Dyke Houses Tenants Association. And I'm sure when she begins to speak, she's going to say there are three of them. And she is only president of one, but she had the opportunity to say that. My first question, there are two types, I understand, of rent-controlled apartments. Judge, please feel free to clarify that.
There's rent stabilization and rent control. Rent control are tenants that have been in apartments generally prior to 1970. And that apartment can even be in a 3 or 4 family home. If they were there prior to the cutoff, they are rent controlled. They don't have a written lease. They have what we call a statutory lease, meaning that their tenancy rolls over every year as long as they pay the rent. Then there's what's called rent stabilization, which was enacted in the 80s, somewhere along that line, in which you have a written lease that is renewed every year, depending on whether you opt for a 1-year or a 2-year term. That is both of those leases, both of the tenancy, rent controlled, and the lease, rent stabilized, are governed by the RGB guidelines. There's usually increases, if there are any granted, that will be specific to rent controlled as well as specific to rent stabilization.
Well, the recent rent control guidelines, the increases, the 3.5% and the 5%, that's affected both landlords and tenants. It seems to be a balancing act between the two. Lisa Kenner.
Yeah, but I wouldn't know, would that affect public housing because we're supposed to pay 30% of our income. So I don't know if that's going to affect public housing, the 3.2% and the 5%, because we go by our income. It's 30% of your income. So I think we're different than private home.
Okay. Judge, you want to slip in on that one?
Sure, she's correct. NYCHA, which is New York City Housing Authority, governed by federal and this is overlay of both federal and state law. Their rents are based on their income, and their rents are usually no more than 1/3 of their income. Rent stabilization and rent control apply to private housing, not public housing. Same way with HUD. If you have HUD Section 8, for example, those rents are set by HUD, DHCR, Department of Housing Community Renewal. Those rents are set by the DHCR based on a formula that is implemented by the administering agency. So she is correct.
So the rent guidelines increases that have been announced. Tell me, Lisa, that does not affect you. Judge, who would be affected by that? I know you sort of talked about that just now, but in more detail.
Anyone that's covered by a rent, that is governed by a rent stabilized lease or in a rent controlled apartment. Again, these are generally, they're all private landlords. They can be in huge buildings because there's sometimes construction called 2080. And so you can have buildings that, have 150, 200, 500 tenants or more, but they have a tax credit that's linked to 20% being preserved for low-income people. Oftentimes they're covered by rent stabilization. But it's private landlords in which the apartments or buildings are governed by the rent regulation laws, which is generally pegged to either tax status, tax subsidy that the landlord is granted sometimes when building the property and certainly after the property. Also just buildings that are prior to a certain date and have at least 6 or more tenants in the building. But again, that can change because in rent controlled, you can literally have a 2-family house. My former employer had a 3-family, and she had a rent controlled tenant in her garden or bottom floor, and it was only 3-family. But because she had been in the building so long, she was covered by rent control.
Ms. Kenner, you're president of one of the many houses that's owned by NYCHA, that's governed by NYCHA. What are the concerns that you have in your particular NYCHA house that I'm sure many other persons who are living in NYCHA houses may have as well? What are your major concerns?
Well, one of the major concerns that I've been talking about is gas outage. Some people apartments been without gas since February. And here it is June, had like 46 apartments. So when we was talking today, I brought that up again. The lights, intercoms. The intercoms are brand new, and I've been fighting with them for 6 years to get the intercoms fixed, because then they wonder why everything get broken, why the glass is broke, because the intercom's not working. For 6 years, and these are brand new intercoms, never worked.
Have you approached New York City's legal departments about these issues that you have?
Listen, I see, we're underneath the mayor's action plan that's going back. When they have the meeting at, where they had at 1 Central Street, 1 Police Plaza, that's one of the first things I talk about, because then they wonder why things get vandalized at the door because the intercoms are not working. And these were brand new intercoms, like they put the lighting on the ground. In 5 buildings, the intercoms don't work. And then some people don't know their intercoms don't work or do work because management didn't put a paper out say, if your intercom is not working, come and give us your telephone number so we can set it up. I think that's one of the main things besides the gas outage, because some people are just got diabetes, they got to eat proper. You can't use a hot plate and a slow cooker. So some people been using this since February the 2nd. I have another building been out since February the 22nd. And then they just told me about another one. So that's one really the concerns. And also the dogs. You're supposed to, when they go back, you're supposed to be 20 pounds. Your dog supposed to be 20 pounds. And some dogs look like they're 50 pounds. And, a lot of people are worried about dogs is off the leash and stuff like that. And it could be the biggest, it could be the smallest. They got teeth. So, people apartments, people had leaks in their apartments and stuff. They pretty much coming along to fix it. And I tell you, with this new transfer work order reform, they just coming out with, Brooklyn was the last one to get it. So went through they had a Zoom call. So we're gonna see how this works, because they're supposed to have a neighborhood planner after the maintenance come out, and you call the neighborhood planner and you tell them what you need. They've got a ticket and all that. So we're gonna see.
Judge, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, is this a program? Well, before I'm going to ask you if this applies to the NYCHA houses as well. But first of all, for persons who don't know, what is this ERPA?
The ERAP program is it's a program that's administered by the Office of Temporary Disability. Anyone that can establish that they were impacted by COVID in any way, both physically, also in terms of your job, losing your job, hours lost, so forth. They have a list of criteria. They can apply for rental assistance, and that rental assistance will be for what's considered the COVID period, which is generally March of 2020 to June, July of 21. Others kind of estimate that it may go through the end of 21. That depends on the Office of Temporary Disability. You can file for that relief via email, or there are actually, I think, certain sites, you might be able to even go down to the Office of Temporary Disability. There are also community agencies that help tenants apply for that assistance. I believe that everyone is eligible for that. I'm not sure how it would play out in terms of NYCHA, but I would assume that if because your income is always a third, the rent is always a third of your income. So it seems to me that if COVID hit you and you lost that income, then your rent would go down automatically anyway. So I'm not sure, but I assume if you can establish that you were somehow impacted by COVID and were unable to pay the rent, then the Office of Temporary Disability would make a determination, and then they would pay the rent directly to the landlord.
But I don't believe they did it for NYCHA. I think we was the last at the bottom. Because I know people had applied for it, but they never got it. They even have workers coming out, knocking on people's doors and stuff like that, filling out the application, and the people didn't get it,
Well,
So,
there was a delay because the initial payment by the government, and when I say that, the federal government that contributed a large amount of money to the state budget, and that was going to be allocated to ERAP, they ran through that really quickly. And then there was a period of time where they were accepting applications, but they had no money. And landlords even brought a lawsuit saying that's kind of ridiculous. How do you accept applications, but you don't have money? The Office of Temporary Disability's position was, we think money will be coming. And sure enough, there was a second round of federal funding that was matched somehow by the state. And then the portal was opened back up and there was actually money being paid out again. So I always suggest to the tenants that come through, if you applied and were denied, and I'm not trying to make a rap, but if you applied and were denied, go back because they will reconsider.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy, that addresses your concern.
yes, if somebody come to me, I'm gonna tell them go back and reapply.
Good, good. And Judge, they have right to counsel, that is correct? And that is counsel that is provided by the government, or they have to have their own concept?
Right now, we have what has been termed right to counsel. It's a little bit different than in criminal court, in which you have an 18B panel of judges that take cases as they come forward. And there is a statutory mandate that requires you to have an attorney, irregardless of economic status. The right to counsel in housing court is tied to your income, and it's a certain percentage above the poverty level. I think 200 or 300% above poverty level. You have to go through a vetting process to see that you qualify by virtue of income. So you can come to housing court and be over income, meaning then that you will not have an attorney provided to you unless you fit another category. For example, you may be 60, 63 or 4. You may be over income, but there's what's also called the assigned counsel program, or ACP, and that's tied to your age only. So I could refer you to ACP and you would be able to get an attorney, even though you might be over income in terms of the right to counsel, because right to counsel isn't an absolute right to have an attorney in housing court. It's a right to have the ability to have an attorney if you fit the economic criteria set out by the statute.
Ms. Kennedy, what are the concerns that have been expressed by members of your organization?
Well, they just voted on this trust because they had RAD and PAC, which is private development with housing. I say they sold, because I'm not going to be here 99 years. And they sold to the buildings, the developers took over. And then they came up with the trust, that being that they $40 billion in, and they want to fix up everything. So it passed by the legislation, assembly and all that. So, people, not easy to trust housing, you got to earn our trust, especially when you tell us so many stories down the line. You got to show us. So they talked about it. So you could be in the trust, or you don't be in the trust, or you be rad and pack. We don't want to go rad and pack. We don't want to go under no developers. So it's up in the air. So they need 25,000 units to go through the trust. So they're supposed to be able to fix up stuff and things like that. But my thing is, if you don't go in the trust and you stay in the middle, do your place get fixed up? Do things get done right? It still be underneath NYCHA. But is some kind of way that things is, you know, people don't see it as right, because you may get in there and then something happen. It's still like go to Section 8, you be out of Section 9. Section 9, you got more rights than you got Section 8. That's what they think. So we got to see. You know, they got to show me, it got to be in black and white. They got to sign stuff. Because it's hard to trust when you know it's hard to trust somebody, especially when they told you stories all along. So now they can't, you know, you tell your children, can't trust everybody. They got to show you.
Ms. Kennedy, you talked about knowing your rights and the importance of knowing your rights. Judge, what are the rights that tenants need to know?
Wow, that's like opening an encyclopedia and starting to read. I mean, I can give you your perspective from coming into housing court. The first thing you should know is to have an attorney is better than not having one. So as soon as you come in to file an answer, let's say you get papers, NYCHA is going to be a little bit different. I understand now because I agree with you, you've got the various different kinds of programs, you've got these RAD conversions. My understanding is there's still a moratorium. NYCHA is just beginning to start cases. And I believe they're only holdovers. I don't believe they're non-payments. I don't know everything that's going on with NYCHA, but I think it's really fluid. And I think it could lead to something very positive for tenants, but I can understand how you want to have a wait and see attitude, given kind of what you've experienced the last 15 years or so. But you want to, be sure to request an attorney. So when you come in, particularly when the case is first on, it's called what's called the intake part, and you should say, I'm looking for an attorney. The judge and the court attorney will often ask you that, but just in case, say yes. They will then get you to an intake where you'll talk to an attorney to see if you fit the income requirements. Hopefully you will. And if you will, then you're going to be in a better position because they will look at the answer that you may have filed with the clerk at the desk. They can amend the answer to include major defenses. Clearly, one of the defenses, you didn't get the papers. Bottom line is, if you're not properly served, the court doesn't have jurisdiction. I like to explain that is the court doesn't have the power to do something over you or towards you if you're not properly served with papers. So obviously that's going to be one of the first things. Did you get the papers? Did you see them on your door? Did someone knock on your door at a particular time? Obviously the other major defense is going to be repairs. I didn't pay rent because I didn't, there were repairs haven't been done in my apartment. I have mold, I have cracked windows, I have a non-working intercom, I have obviously the vermin, whether it be rats or roaches or whatever the case may be. So you want to be able to write that down and say, these are the conditions in my apartment. And in that, I'm looking for what's called an abatement of rent. The way I look at it is, if your apartment is perfect, landlord's entitled to 100%. If there are things that the landlord is supposed to do that they didn't do, then courts can knock off percentages, 5%, 10%, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50. It can go up. I mean, if your apartment's really a mess, it can go up to 100% abatement per month. So you want to be sure to say, I've had conditions and I want you to give me something off of the rent because I didn't get the apartment the way I should have it. Those really are going to be your major defenses. Newly on the scene is obviously harassment. There's a new harassment statute, and in that statute, it says that landlords should not be threatening you to get your apartment back, should not be making offers to you on a regular basis. I want to buy your apartment. I want to buy your apartment. Obviously, behavior that's threatening, intimidating, those kinds of things should not be not only tolerated, but it should be listed as, frankly, it's a counterclaim or harassment claim in which you want to assert that in court in terms of your non-payment proceeding. When a landlord brings you to court and they want the apartment back, that's simply it. Rent, I will deal with later. I just want the apartment back. Why? Because your lease expired and you're not entitled to renewal, meaning rent stabilized or rent controlled. These are for those for-profit apartments that are not covered by rent regulation. But then you want to be able to assert, I didn't get the proper notice. Laws change. And so if you've been in an apartment for over 2 years, they have to give you a 90-day notice. It's not like a 30-day. If you've been over 2 years, they got to give you 90-day. I think it's a year and under, it's 60-day. And then anything less than a year is 30-day in terms of the types of notice that they have to serve before they commence a proceeding. So you want to be able to talk to an attorney about that because it can get complicated, but you want to say, I didn't get the proper notice in terms of a straight holdover proceeding. So those are like, the major things that come to mind in terms of trying to present your defense. Obviously, saying that you were impacted by COVID now still, because there is a statute that basically says that if rent accrued, you were impacted by COVID, they might be able to get a monetary judgment, but they won't get a judgment of possession. What's that mean? It means it may wreck your credit history potentially because you didn't pay the rent, but they can't kick you out of your apartment. It's called a safe harbor. And that's a major defense if the rent that they're looking for accrued during the period of COVID.
But Judge, I tell residents here to pay your rent. Even if something's not right in your apartment, you have a better chance of, like you're saying, getting a rebate. But if you don't pay your rent, you get yourself more in trouble. You pay your rent, you call the 707 number, 7771, that's the, repair. You call that and you take down your work ticket number. I have some people, they come to me and say, well, this need to be done. I said, well, do you got your work ticket number? They don't have their work ticket number. You got to get your work ticket number. I don't mind helping people, but they got to help themselves first too. And one thing our parents always told us, pay our rent. You have a foot to stand on. I'm not saying like in the private or whatever, but come to housing, you pay your rent. And this way you go take pictures to show that your stuff is not being done, that you put your ticket in, so you have a foot and a leg to stand on.
I agree with you 100%. And frankly, if you came before me in NYCHA, I might suggest that. Here's the issue. When you come to a private landlord, oftentimes the communication is text and they get rid of the text. Sometimes it's the supervisor knocking on your door, not supervisor, but super knocking on your door when you didn't expect it, saying, I want to come in less than 24-hour notice. And you say no. And then they go back and they say, well, that's why I didn't fix your apartment. So I'm suggesting that there are going to be some tenants that withhold their rent. You have a right to do that. And that sometimes is the only way that you can get a private landlord's attention. You are in a different situation because you do actually have a portal. You do actually have a work number, a work ticket number. There are ways that you can verify that you've had an interaction with the landlord. But for some private landlords, particularly during COVID, their offices were closed. You would go and call, there was nobody there to answer the phone call, and there was nobody there to come out and do repairs because nobody wanted to come because they didn't know who had COVID and who didn't. And then they would show up, put fake notices on the door. Yeah, we were here, but those type of things. So there are going to be some people that withheld their rent. And I'm just saying, I'm not suggesting yes or no, but I'm suggesting that if you do that, be sure to put in your answer, I'm withholding my rent because of conditions.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when they come here, they still put their masks on their face.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they should. I mean, ultimately, we're going through various variants, and I forget what variant we are now. Luckily, if you're, and I'm not getting into the whole political issue, whether you get vaccinated or not, but the reality is that now with so many people being vaccinated and boosted and so forth, luckily, we're not seeing people immediately going to hospitals and so forth, but people are still getting sick. And so I think, I think workers that come around, yeah, they're going to still wear their mask, and don't take it as anything personal. It's just that you can still get sick from the variants that are out there.
Well, we're out of time. Ms. Lisa Kenner, who is president of the NYCHA Van Dyke 1 houses. Ms. Kenner, you said that there are 3 of these houses, correct?
Van Dyke 1, Van Dyke 2, and there's a private developer. They named it Van Dyke 3.
Okay.
So we could be together.
Yes. So I want to thank you for being on our program, and Judge Kevin and I keep mispronouncing your name, McClanahan. I got it right.
Absolutely. People get more afraid of it. It's much easier than it looks.
Okay, well, we should be afraid of judges, not names. Housing Court Judge Kevin McClanahan. We want to thank you for being on Brooklyn 45, and we hope that this program has been useful for all of you who are tenants, whether you are in a private housing area or if you are in a government housing section, NYCHA section. We hope this program has been useful to you. This is Brooklyn 45, and I want to thank you for being on our program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad I was invited, and I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you.
Of course, Brooklyn 45 is a 501c3 not-for-profit television program, and that provides a tax benefit for all of you who decide to support us. So please support Brooklyn 45. And when you support us, our communities benefit as well. On behalf of our Brooklyn 45 team, I'm Sam Taitt.
Brooklyn 45 is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we welcome your support. Check out our website, brooklyn45.com, and feel free to donate or share it with your friends and family. Have any comments or questions? Send them to our Facebook, facebook.com/Brooklyn45TV. If you have any questions or topics you think we should cover next, shoot me an email over at brooklyn45tv@gmail.com. Thank you again for watching.